Somebody, a friend of mine who works on Wall Street, texted me today, and he's like, well, I think the fake trade war might be getting canceled.
Welcome to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM for Thursday, April 24th. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm joined by RCP co-founder and president Tom Bevan and National Review columnist Heather Wilhelm. So today, Donald Trump took another swing at Harvard, calling the university a, quote, threat to democracy. And yesterday, on Wednesday, the president signed an executive order aimed at changing the way colleges are accredited, which basically will affect their ability to access federal money. Tom, Trump calls this his secret weapon. So how does this new executive order affect colleges, and could it really be a game changer?
It could potentially, and it is in a sense a secret weapon. I don't think a lot of people understand how the process of how colleges get accredited and universities get accredited and who controls that. And it's been controlled by, a very small group of people that have, as with the institutions themselves, moved sort of dramatically to the left over the years. And so there are a number of sort of alternate organizations that have sprung up. Professor Robbie George at Princeton has been working on one, and there are a number of other ones to try and wrest that process away from this sort of, cabal of leftists who've been managing it. And so in that sense, it is a secret weapon, and it could have real consequences. I mean, to the extent that this is how universities, they get accredited and then they qualify for federal funds, as you mentioned, Pell Grants and the like. And to the extent that there's some competition in the marketplace, it could really change the game in terms of the way that the institution, the university and academia has been run for decades.
Yeah, so Heather, there are about 60 of these groups. They're nonprofits. They're spread out across the country. But they haven't been viewed as sort of a political pawn before. This is kind of new. What do you make of it?
The thing that I think strikes most people when they're reading this story or hearing about it are just the numbers. We're talking about $2.2 billion. It's mind-boggling. Harvard has an endowment, I believe, around $53 billion. Full freight for Harvard, I think, is around $84,000. And so I think most Americans' first takeaway looking at this story is, why are we giving these people any money at all? And the Tom, you're exactly right. I mean, the whole accreditation process is something that most Americans do not understand. What I think is interesting here, what's going on at Harvard, is they've been in hot water about these type of issues before. There was the case of them actively discriminating against Asian American applicants. And now the Trump administration is coming after them with what seems like, on the surface, pretty straightforward requests, reassessing, having merit-based admissions. But I think this showdown is going to unfold over the next couple of months. It'll be really interesting to watch.
So Harvard president, Tom, Alan Garber, he was on NBC last night, Wednesday, said there would be no compromise on certain issues. It was kind of an interesting way he phrased the no compromise. I felt like that was a planned out soundbite and was meant to sort of satisfy all sides. But an astute observer like you must have picked up that on certain issues part, right?
Yeah, it was not a full, normally there's no compromise, right? That's the line you draw, no compromise on certain issues. And you're right, that was a very conspicuous phrasing of that, which I think leaves the door open to,
compromise.
some sort of accommodation where, maybe Harvard can appease the administration. I do think, and the president of Harvard, Alan Garber's become this sort of, heroic figure in the media over the last, 10, 12 days, and is sort of leading the charge against standing up to the Trump administration. But I think a lot of these university presidents, they recognize that they do have some issues and Harvard had said, look, we've been taking steps to resolve sort of the anti-Semitism stuff on campus. We just saw, there was an incident on Princeton's campus a couple of weeks ago. There was stuff going on at Yale right now. So clearly there's a problem at these campuses, and in some ways they know that they need to reform and address these issues because they're losing trust with the public. It's been a public relations sort of disaster for them. And the Trump administration demands sort of allow them some cover to make those changes. But at the same time, they don't want to do what Colombia did, which is acquiesce to all these demands, and which folks on the left would certainly see as capitulation and involving, a stifling of academic freedom and the like. So he's trying to thread the needle here, and we'll see whether he's able to do it or not.
Yeah, Heather, is this the art of the deal where Trump makes sort of a maximalist demand and then compromises? Because the criticism, as Tom says, that people like Garber say, yeah, we've got some problems with anti-Semitism, but he's asking us to do a bunch of other stuff which has nothing to do with that. Is that where the deal comes together? It comes together around sort of a more focused aspect of on the anti-Semitic issues, or is there no room for a compromise on this?
I think this is part of the fun that we're all having following the Trump administration. I think
fun. That's an interesting way to put it.
I think it's great. There was a story yesterday, I believe, on CNN saying, oh, Trump and Harvard are getting close to compromise. And I believe this morning, Trump sent out on Truth Social, he says Harvard is an anti-Semitic far left institutions. This place is a liberal mess, allowing a certain group of crazed lunatics to enter and exit the classroom. So, who knows what's going to happen tomorrow? I think what's been really interesting about watching this administration, and I think we're going to talk about tariffs later, is they're very good at saying, never mind, and changing course completely. So you might be right. This might all be part of a grand negotiation strategy, but it'll be entertaining to see it unfold.
Yeah. Well, Tom, speaking of Harvard, we have now the 50th edition of the Harvard Youth Poll. It's a poll that I find very interesting. It tracks what 18 to 29-year-olds are thinking. I'm sure you've looked at it. What do you make of this year's edition? Anything jump out at you from it?
Well, the main takeaway, and this is the poll, Harvard's been doing this for years and years, and John Della Volpe, who we all know and who we've worked with in the past, conducts this poll, and he's very, very good at it, and they've got sort of a long established track record. And one of the things that just sort of jumped off the page was that young voters view Democrats in Congress, I think is the actual phrase, their favorability rating has dropped by half. So what used to be 48% is now down to 23%. And you can see the movement over time. It's just from 5 years ago, which is the comparison point from 2020 to 2025. Their favorability rating has been halved. And look, part of that is, I think, it's not all folks thinking that Democrats have moved too far to the left. I mean, certainly there's people in that 18 to 29 demographic who think that Democrats aren't left enough, and that's why they don't view them favorably anymore. I mean, this is part of the problem that Democrats have had, right? Chuck Schumer voting to keep the government open. Well, now his approval rating and his favorable rating is as low as Mitch McConnell's was because he's viewed unfavorably by members of his own party. And so I think that's part of what's going on here. But it is the one statistic in this poll that just absolutely sort of jumped out, because none of the other, Republicans, nobody else has suffered the same sort of shift in their favorable ratings as the Democrats have seen.
Yeah, the Republicans approval of Republicans over that same period went from like 28 to 29%, so, or 29 to 28%, I guess. So they've never been very popular with young people, but they remain at the same level of unpopularity as they always have been.
Consistently unpopular.
It's the good news. Heather, did you look at the poll? Anything jump out at you?
I did. Two things jumped out at me. One, I was actually encouraged by, it's only 19% of young people trust the federal government to do the right thing most of the time. I think that's great. I think it should actually be a little lower. So that was encouraging for me. But then another striking number I pulled out of there was just 48% of young Americans, and in this poll that's 18 to 29-year-olds, say having kids is important. I think that's a really striking number. And, there's been a lot of discussion both in the government and cultural spheres about what this means for the future of the world, really, the decline in childbearing. So I thought that was a shocking number. 48% seems exceptionally low to me.
It's funny you mentioned that because that was the number that jumped out at me as well. And that was in response to a question about life goals. And I think they listed 6 life goals. And this was having children was at the bottom, which so you're right. I mean,
we can't leave it up to Elon. He's doing his best, but we need some help from these young folks.
Right. All right. Well, guys, we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom Bevan and Heather Wilhelm. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Heather Wilhelm and with Tom Bevan. And Heather, 12 states have sued the Trump administration in the U.S. Court of International Trade in New York. This happened all on Wednesday. They're trying to stop his tariff policy. Basically, they are arguing that only Congress has the power to impose tariffs. It's one more attempt to roll back Trump on his tariff policies. But they may be rolling themselves back a little bit on their own. What do you make of the state's case, and what do you make of Trump's week so far on tariffs?
A friend of mine who works on Wall Street, texted me today, and he's like, "Well, I think the fake trade war might be getting canceled." It's so fascinating to watch. We're gonna tariff the Chinese by 264%, and now they're saying today we're going to be, quote, very nice to them. I feel very bad for any commentator who has to follow this every day and write about it in detail, because it really is a whiplash of a process. So, I can see why, the tariffs are they're actually shockingly popular among certain people, but among the general public, I think there's a lot of confusion. I think the messaging is not great. And particularly for people, I feel really bad for people who work on Wall Street and have to watch the market make these wild swings just based on conjecture. So I don't have any prediction of what's going to happen. This is just a wait and see. But I guess, the real question is, does this uncertainty, does this sense of chaos and sort of shaking up the system, is that going to be helpful in the long run? I think it's possible. That, because there clearly are trade imbalances, and it does seem that something should be done, but we're not there yet.
Yeah. Well, Tom, do you think, the sort of headline is Trump has blinked, at least that's the way a lot of people are putting this. And also that he said yesterday that he was not going to fire Jerome Powell, Fed chairman. Makes you think, are there people inside the administration who have now gotten Trump's ear who might not have gotten his ear a week ago?
Maybe. I think there's a little bit of triumphalism on, the folks on the left and the media. I saw that headline from the New York Times, Trump blinks and blinks again. And, I saw MSNBC was sort of gloating over the fact that Elon's profits are down 70% and he's going to have to step away from Doge, and he's totally, he's unpopular and the like. But we'll see. What was interesting to me about these 12 states, right? I just assumed, okay, 12 states. It's the usual suspects. It's all the blueies, right? It's New York and Illinois and California. And it was Vermont and but there were 2 states in there, Arizona and Nevada, that both voted for Trump in 2024 and are legit swing states, right? And even the what was it? The Attorney General of Arizona went on record calling Trump's tariff scheme insane. So I thought, that's an interesting strategy when you're in a state that is Trump friendly to be, siding with all these other blue states against his tariff policies. So we'll see how that works out for those folks. But look, tariffs they have been incredibly unsettling and disturbing to not just folks in America and the uncertainty and business people, but around the globe. And Trump is sort of continues to push them, even though we've seen the results of that in our own polling and in polling from other organizations that the public is generally pretty skeptical about tariffs. They don't think they do what the Trump administration says they do. And it has been a drag on his numbers. There's no question about that. And again, that's short term. And so, there's a medium term here and a long term here. And to Heather's point, it may end up in a good place for the Trump administration if they can sort of find their way through it. or it may be a disaster. I mean, it's still a work in progress, and we'll see.
Yeah. Well, there are these, you're talking about polls, and we're always looking at the polls. There's new polling from AP, just came out yesterday or today. 59% disapprove of Trump's handling of the economy. 52% oppose tariffs in general. 59% says his tariff policy has gone too far. I want to we can break those numbers down a little bit more granularly, but across the board, 76% do say, Heather, that tariffs will raise prices. So they seem to have at least gotten sort of the basic Adam Smith view of the world here down.
Yeah. And I was looking at that same poll. It's interesting. I think there's a pretty big partisan divide. And 4 in 10, it says, think the tariffs will increase jobs. 4 in 10 think it will decrease jobs. But one is kind of surprising. Half of adults are very positive that the tariffs will increase domestic manufacturing. So it's a real mixed bag. And I think if we're all honest, not a lot of people understand tariffs, including a lot of the people in Washington and including a lot of the people who write about tariffs. So, these polls are fascinating. And you got to wonder, if they stick with this for the long haul, will those numbers change?
Yeah. Well, Heather raises an interesting point, and it's something that jumped out to me as well, Tom, on these polls. This 60% of Republicans say the economy is in good shape when asked that question. 80% of Democrats disagree. They say now, we're all living in the same economy for the most part. It just makes me wonder, when we look at these polls, what are they really telling us? They're really not measuring objectively what people think about the economy. Aren't these people answering these questions just sort of signaling whether or not they approve of the guy who's in office right now?
Yes, 100%. It's our tribalism, certainly among Democrats, which is why I always try and focus on independents, because they actually, I think independents do. But you're right. I mean, and we see this like on election day. So if there was an election today and the Democrat won, okay, and tomorrow we polled all the same people, they would all have the opposite opinion. 60% of Democrats would say the economy's in great shape.
Right. And
Republicans would all say it's in the shitter, right? I mean, it's just, and we saw this with Trump when he won in November. I mean, Democrats were contending that the economy was great all the way through that election until he got elected. And then, of course, it's terrible. Right. And vice versa. So look, a lot of this is polling is tough in such a tribal partisan environment. And especially when you're talking about a person like Trump who elicits, very, very strong opinions in both directions. And so, yes, we have to take, I think, these polls with a grain of salt. But in the aggregate, I mean, it does. That's the best metric we can get. And again, if you look at independents in particular, who are a little less partisan, a little less ideological, I think they're kind of the key to what moves these numbers up or down. And right now they're moving down because I think independents are skeptical of maybe, I think they're skeptical of tariffs in general, but more particularly, I think they're skeptical of the way it's been rolled out. We've talked about this before. I think the Trump administration, had they done a better job of prepping the public about what they were doing, why they were doing it, why it was important, they would be in a much better place with the public than, the way they did it. And Trump just basically finally acknowledging after a little bit, there'll be a transition. I mean, that's basically all he said. Mm-hmm. And that hasn't obviously got the job done.
Yeah. Yeah. So Heather, this view on what it will do to prices, which 76%, and I did look at both Republicans and Democrats and independents, all three. All of them are plus 50 on that. And it seems to me that that's the real rub for the administration. He was elected largely because people thought prices were too high and heading north. He said he would get them down. If people aren't seeing that and they think that tariffs are going to make that issue worse, that seems to me the real issue he's going to be facing.
Yeah, that does seem exactly where the rubber hits the road for most people. And it'll be fascinating to watch how this plays out. I was skiing over spring break when these rumblings were beginning and people were wildly panicking about wine prices. They were really worried in the Colorado mountain towns about, the price of French wine. So at least they've had a breather on that one. It's okay. Yeah.
Now we know how Heather views the world.
I was going to say, Heather's tipping her hat here. She's an elitist.
Look at that. Yeah. I'm worried about the price of eggs.
Gathering information on the street.
Doing market research.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Absolutely. Love it.
On the slopes of Aspen. Very good.
Yep.
Hey, we've got about just a minute left here, Tom. The president did say he was going to, he would not raise marginal taxes on millionaires. Good news for Heather's friends, I guess.
So
what do you make of him walking that back?
So we had this conversation a few days ago because remember, we ran on the front page. There was a New York Post article from Steve Moore, Art Laffer, and Steve Forbes basically saying, hey, Mr. President, don't do this. It's a big mistake. And then we also ran a piece by Larry Kudlow where, he said, look, I don't think the president's going to do this. He's taking in all sorts of differing viewpoints and he's going to make his decision. But I honestly don't think he's going. And Larry Kudlow turned out to be right. I mean, I think Trump, that it's clear there was something happening within the administration, that this was a subject that was being discussed and was floated and taken somewhat seriously. But at the end of the day, Donald Trump decided that would be a bad thing. And so Larry Kudlow's happy and he was right.
Yeah. Heather, 30 seconds. Is this a triumph for the Reaganite wing and what's left of it in the Republican Party?
I would be so thrilled if the administration would continue to focus like a laser on spending. Sure, this is fine, it's great, but talk about taxes. Let's focus on spending and cutting spending, and I hope that DOGE continues to push forward with government efficiency rather than focusing on ratcheting up tax rates here and there.
Excellent. Well, we're going to have to leave it there. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I've been talking with Heather Wilhelm and with Tom Bevan. Don't go away. We'll be back with more Real Clear Politics right after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm joined now by Chris Ruddy. He is the president and CEO of Newsmax Media. He runs the cable news channel Newsmax, as well as a growing number of other media properties. Chris, welcome to the program.
Andrew, thank you for having me on.
So our listeners are probably familiar with Newsmax. So I wanted to start with these latest Nielsen numbers, which just came out pretty good for the network. They show a 50% increase in total audience year over year in the first quarter. That makes you guys the number 4 U.S. cable news channel ahead of Fox Business, News Nation, and even CNBC. So what explains the rise in the first quarter numbers?
Well, I think it's even more impressive than that. We're number 5 in all of cable, which is, there's hundreds of cable channels. We had 34 million people, Andrew, tune in Q1 of this year, up from 22 million. That was a 50% increase. And you've been in media, so you know this is not normal. This is supernatural almost. And I think that people are turning to Newsmax because they're tired of the old media, the legacy media, and they want something new. They're even tired a bit with Fox. And they're turning to Newsmax and they like it. Our numbers have been very consistent in growing and on almost every vector. Not only the TV shows, our streaming channel Newsmax 2. We've had over 15 million downloads on the Newsmax app, which people can take from their iPhone or Android phones and download for free, or their home TV. So just an amazing growth. Reuters Institute actually just did a study last year, and they found that there are 12 U.S. news brands, and we were one of them. So remember the club. I'm not sure I really want to be a member of the club, but we're certainly a member of the club.
Yeah. You're compared mostly to Fox, which of course is the biggest player in the cable news right now. Leading the pack by a wide margin. How do you view Fox, and what's the difference between what you do and what Fox does?
Well, I don't see Fox as a competitor. I think they're in our area, but I see Newsmax as doing our own thing. And when people ask me that question, I get asked it a lot. It's an important question. I always say, just go to Newsmax and watch it. If you have cable, we're on every major cable system, and you'll see the difference. I think we're less agenda-oriented. we're more informational, we're more open to discussions and points of view. And I think that, for example, Fox, well known, opposed Trump in the 2016 election. They opposed him in the 20, they opposed him in 24.
Mhm.
Now, Newsmax's position is actually a lot more nuanced and a lot more consistent with journalism. We didn't oppose or support, even though we're considered very supportive or friendly of him. But we had Ron DeSantis on during the primary. We had all of the candidates all the time. And Trump was okay with that, but the Fox froze him out for periods of time. They froze out
Mhm.
Trump family members for periods of time. I think that's wrong. I don't think our job as a network, if MSNBC and CNN in the 20 election said, we want Biden, we're going to not have Bernie Sanders on and Kamala Harris and these other people, there would have been like an uproar in the Democratic Party. And there was no uproar in the Republican Party, even though they were freezing out Trump or being very negative about him in 24. So I think that's the difference.
And when you look at Fox's coverage of Trump now, I mean, they've given Laura Trump her own program, right? Do you think that they've gone too far in supporting Trump?
No, I think that Trump just came out with a note today saying that Rupert Murdoch had promised him he would reevaluate the Fox pollster. The Fox polls generally are not good polls; they're not accurate.
Mm.
I mean, historically, that's my feeling. And the Wall Street Journal's been heavily criticizing Trump, and many people at Fox on the Tariffs. Again, I think it's good to have two points of view, but Fox seems to have much more of an agenda. But you know what? The country, it's 300 plus million people. We can have more than one conservative leaning media for
Right.
national TV. I think it's dangerous that so much power was accumulated in Fox. And I'm open for more competition. When Newsmax started in 1998 on the web, I don't know if Real Clear was available back then, but I remember we were one of the first conservative big media, and I welcomed all the other media because I felt the pie would get bigger
Yeah.
online. And it has. We're still one of the major players, Newsmax.com online, but the pie has grown bigger. So it
Mm.
hasn't hurt us to
Yeah.
have more players.
Yeah. So, Chris, I wanted to ask you about how you view the cable industry generally, though, because there's a lot of emphasis on streaming. You've mentioned what you're doing in streaming. Is the cable bundle sort of a thing of the past? And as you look at the company today, do you see growth in traditional cable, or is the growth going to be more on the streaming side?
Well, I think the bundle is a danger to consumers. It's not good for competition. I think it's a bit of a racket, and it should have been banned. It's still allowed, and the players in cable TV, the networks are still banding together to keep the bundle because they benefit tremendously. It hurts consumer prices, it hurts competition and diversity of ideas. So I'm against the bundle, but I don't see it going away. But Newsmax, I think cable's going to still be very robust for a long time, and for two reasons: live news and live sports.
Right.
And we're live news, and there aren't a lot of options on the center right. I think we already have an audience. Like when you mentioned we're bigger than CNBC, we're actually bigger than Fox Business, CNBC, and News Nation
Mm.
combined. So we actually have a really big audience, and I think it would be hard for the cable industry to ever to let us go. We're on all the cable systems. In fact, we've been growing systems.
Yeah.
So
And you're getting a fee now, right?
correct. We get cable license fees from all the operators. So we think that it's going to remain a very good business. As you know, Newsmax just went public on the New York Stock Exchange. People can buy our shares on the New York Stock Exchange under the symbol NMAX, and that's gone very well. The Financial Times did an article, and they looked through all our documents. It's the only analyst that ever did this, and said Newsmax actually has a very bright future and a great business model because it's not only doing the old cable world, and it's going to grow in that, even though it's a declining market, will grow, but that we have the streaming channel, Newsmax 2, our streaming channels on all platforms, Samsung and Roku. And then we have our Plus service that's also got about 300,000 subscribers,
Mm-hmm.
Newsmax Plus, that allows people to subscribe. So we've got this tremendous engine that is 25 years old. We've broken through every time people said we would not. We did. And I think hopefully history will be prologue and that we'll continue to have successes.
Yeah, I think that's something that people don't sort of understand about Newsmax is that because your roots were really in the digital space, you then moved, you were successful in cable. And now as the world sort of goes back into sort of this digital area, you guys are sort of uniquely positioned because those are your roots. That's where you come from. So I would think that streaming and sort of the whole digital world would be something you're familiar with personally, because that's sort of where you made your bones initially.
Andrew, it's a really astute comment that you make, and I've told many, many people that say, why did Newsmax succeed? We had this powerful digital engine we built over 25 years. So we had databases, email lists, websites, social media of 20 million followers, right? That takes hundreds of millions of dollars to build right now. And we already had that. So when we launched Newsmax TV, we could tell people on our digital platforms, go to Newsmax. This show is Rob Schmidt's going to be on Greta Van Susteren, Donald Trump. We had the ability without any marketing costs to go out to tens of millions of people online.
Right.
And companies like News Nation didn't have that. One America didn't have that. They've all failed, but we've had it. And then what's really been good is, as you say, and you picked up astutely, now we have the television audience and we can push them back into the digital, and the digital properties are growing. So that's the whole ball of wax, is the digital base.
So you raised $300 million, if I'm correct, before the IPO, and then, as you mentioned, the IPO, the stock has gone up, it's gone down. It's right now, I think I checked today, I think it's about $23. It opened at 14, so it is a pretty good story so far. What are you going to do with all that money?
Well, we're up over 100% over the $10 share price we went out. I think we have a really good story to tell. And
but are you going to invest in digital? You're going to build more cable distribution, international? What's the plan?
Yeah, we laid out with investors, and we have all of this, by the way, on newsmaxinvest.com, our webpage for this. We have three major areas. The cable news channel is still growing, and we're going to invest there. The streaming channel, Newsmax 2. And then we're going to continue to invest in the Newsmax Plus service, where we have a lot of films and documentaries, family-friendly entertainment, so beyond news. So we have those three big areas, and we may do some acquisitions as well. We don't have any immediate plans.
All right.
So it's all moving in the right direction. And we think that, people that are interested, certainly we want Americans to join with us. They can buy shares if they go to newsmaxinvest.com, read all the SEC filings and the like, and make an informed decision.
I'm talking to Chris Ruddy. He's the CEO of Newsmax. I'm Andrew Walworth. This is RealClearPolitics. I saw that you recently made this deal to distribute Newsmax in the Dominican Republic. And I was surprised when I looked at that to see that you have distribution deals in about 100 countries right now. And to me, that raised this interesting question about the role of U.S. media overseas, especially given the fact that the Trump administration is moving to reform or shutter VOA and the other public diplomacy outlets. And I'm wondering how you view, when you sit back as an executive who's worked in the international arena now, how do you view sort of the need for U.S. government-supported news agencies at this point?
Well, I used to be a fan of VOA, but then through the years, you'd ask yourself, it really was a Cold War anachronism, right? I mean, the Cold War really required to have an American media outlet that would tell the story into the Eastern Europe and things like this. Over time, you wonder, because the VOA, let's say, would be very critical of President Trump. Like, why are they criticizing U.S. policy or U.S. politicians? And we're paying for it? So then the other thing I noticed, and I travel a lot, as you probably do, around the world, and you meet people, I can't ever remember anyone ever saying to me, I saw this on the VOA, or I watched the VOA. And so any of our American programs. So it makes you wonder who's actually watching these shows. And you wonder, is it just $1 billion? And I don't think it's going to matter at the end of the day. And I'm not sure it's really promoting American values. So it's sort of like NPR, like, you and I have to make a profit to go out and do a real business and get ads to publish or subscriptions. Why does NPR get donations from the government? Let them, if they want to do it privately, fine, God bless them, but don't have taxpayers do it.
Yeah. Well, Chris, we're going to have to leave it there. I really appreciate you coming on. It's great to talk to you. You've been listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I've been talking to Chris Ruddy. He's the CEO of Newsmax Media. Don't go away. And we'll be back with more Real Clear Politics right after this.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief of Real Clear Politics, talking now with our copy desk, Kathy Warren, who's copy chief, and Ann Welty, who does copy editing and other editing. They both do other editing. And they're in the Midwest. So sometimes we like to get outside the Beltway. It's helpful. We talked to Susan Crabtree. Everyone's from California occasionally. But today we're talking about education and this new initiative. Kathy, I'm going to start with you because you live in Arkansas. Governor Huckabee has signed an order, and this was already a movement in Arkansas, but now it sounds like Arkansas is going to have a bell-to-bell cell phone ban in schools. So from the opening bell to the closing bell, students cannot use their cell phones. How is that playing?
Well, it's playing pretty well. Maybe not with the teachers' unions, but with the teachers themselves and obviously with parents. Parents have some concerns, but overall, I think it's been good. This has been a dizzying few months in the amount of legislation that has passed and been signed by Governor Sanders on the education front. And
I called her Governor Huckabee. That shows how long I've known her. Sarah Huckabee Sanders. Yes, that's her. Talking about the same person. All right.
And Governor Sanders has 3 kids in public school in Arkansas. And so I'm sure this fuels part of her initial drive to get a lot of these things passed in her first couple of years. So yes, we will have beginning in the fall of 25, fall of this year, we will have a bell-to-bell cell phone ban in public schools. And that has been a pilot program until now.
That's grades K through 12, is that?
K through 12. It will be treated somewhat differently in elementary schools than it is in high schools, but there is some form of an all-day ban that has been a pilot program until now. And some of the teachers are really glad that it's gone to mandatory because it was pretty much decided classroom by classroom, which meant the onus was on the teacher. And the teacher a lot of times had to bear the anger of the kids who didn't want to give up their phones. So now it's off their shoulders.
So yeah, I can get that. Tom Cotton is talking. He's made noise about encouraging this to be a nationwide policy. And let's bring you in here. You have kids in public school. The impetus behind this is let's start with that. The distractions to the kids from learning. That's the initial thing. What are some of the other benefits of this?
Well, so yes, distraction is obviously the chief concern, distraction that impedes learning. But, there's a component of it is disrupting relationships. Even in schools where, say, in the classroom, if your phone has to be in your bag. Well, during passing periods, what do kids do? They pull their phone out, they check social media, they check their texts. And so you see them in the hallways. I've observed this in my kids' own school, walking through the halls, looking down at their phones. They're not interacting with their peers. They're not greeting their teachers as they walk through the door. It is disrupting relationships. And as somebody who was homeschooled and, a lot of my parents' friends and family had concerns about us being, socially disadvantaged. I'm seeing kids, in broad areas being socially disadvantaged by being locked into their cell phones. And that's concerning. That's a huge concern.
There's a professor at San Diego State University, Jean Twenge's her name. And she has charted, and other people have too, but she's really the pioneering academic. All of the bad things that we associate with, these Gen Z, suicide ideation, low self-esteem, bad grades, all of these trends that we started to notice date almost to the year of the smartphone, almost the year of kids getting iPhones. And obviously it's not the only factor, but bullying in school, all these problems that have been caused by this marvelous technology that the 3 of us that use every day to facilitate our work life and our personal life and, just getting through the world. But in the hands of teenagers, this thing became a weapon that, wasn't fully studied. It was just sort of dropped in like this great social experiment. But will it help with some of these areas? Because, I don't see it, you can still bully people after hours on the phone. So, are there limits to how much this will help?
Sure. I think this, what this is focused on is during the school day. And yes, cyberbullying will still happen after hours. And there are definitely areas where it will take parents taking initiative, taking the phone away, monitoring conversations. But if we're just talking about the effect on academics, like this is, I think, at best at a local level and maybe even at a state level dealt with by just saying, no, we're not dealing with this anymore. Phones are put away. Phones are in lockers. We're not going to allow this distraction to harm academics that are already struggling anyway.
Kathy, I was thinking about this. I talked to earlier this week to Vince Bielski, who did a piece for Real Clear Investigations about, the Southern surge, they're calling it, Mississippi and Louisiana specifically. They've had this tremendous success. It sounds like there's other things going on in the South. That this cell phone thing has been going on in other states, but now Arkansas is at the vanguard. Texas has been talking about this. What's going on south of the Mason-Dixon line that suddenly these southern states are the epicenter of educational improvement, educational reform?
Maybe it's just that we've had red faces for too long. And just about every list and ladder that you can see, many of the southern states have been at the bottom. Part of that is due to poverty levels and lower levels of higher education. But some of it has just been not paying enough attention to what things can really be done. Like I really enjoyed hearing Bielski talk about the science of reading and how that has become a focus in not just southern states. There are other states too, but it's making the biggest difference rapidly in places that have been typically in the basement.
What are the logistics of it? I mean, how does it work? So the kids get to school, they have to turn in their phones like to a locker, like you had to do in Tombstone when you brought a gun into town. How do they frisk the kids? I mean, I remember my high school years, and we didn't have cell phones then, but we certainly would have. My brothers and I would have circumvented this rule. So how do they police it?
That'll be handled differently in different states and even in different districts and school levels. Right now, during Arkansas's pilot program that's still ongoing this year, middle school kids put their phones in a pocket in a, kind of a hanging thing at the front of each room or side of each room, and they leave it there and they pick it up at the end of the day or the end of the class. There's some problems too, because with high schoolers, you've got kids that are leaving in the middle of the day for vocational education and other things that are off campus. So you can't just say you turn it in at 7:55 and you don't get it back until 4, because what about the kids who go off school campus for lunch or whatever? So those are things that are going to have to be worked out. And what will work some places may not work other places, just like some parents' concerns are going to be working against the new rules. I would not want to be the administrator telling parents in Uvalde, Texas, that their kids cannot have phones during the school day.
For instance,
that is not going to be a problem in Bentonville, Arkansas, but there are places that it will be. And that doesn't mean that Uvalde is any more likely to have another school shooting than anywhere else, but there is trauma in that community. And it's something that can't be overlooked. And it's why these things need to be handled as close to the schools as possible, state and district levels.
Well, that was, you anticipated my next question. The state law is pretty interesting because, it takes, the administrators can just say to the parents, oh, it's out of our hands, it's state law. On the other hand, for the reasons Kathy's pointing out, maybe some districts would want this. It just, quickly the pros and cons of having it be, district by district or instead of, or county by county instead of state by state. What's your thoughts about that?
Well, I mean, I agree that these things should be handled at the local level because needs are specific to certain areas and demographics. As a mom with kids in public school, I've had my kids text me from a bathroom saying we're on lockdown. They saw somebody outside. I'm scared. That's a scary thing to hear from your kids. And in those moments, I'm thinking, I'm glad I have contact with my children. When I can think more clearly about it outside of that situation, I can recognize my child needs to be tuned in to the teacher that's in charge of them at the moment. They need to be quiet. They need to be paying attention. Is the best thing and the safest thing for them to have a device in their hands? And I can say without a doubt, no, it's not the safest thing. And so I would say that almost no matter where you are, it's still better to have these devices put away or locked up and trust the teachers and administrators and educators in the building to take care of our children, even in scary situations. Otherwise, we probably shouldn't have them there.
Do either of you anticipate that we'll start to see test scores rise in states that do this, in school districts that do this? I mean, are we going to be able to measure whether this is working?
I think so. I think we've seen the downfall of grades because of the introduction of phones. I believe we will see improvement.
The hard thing is it takes a while.
Yeah.
And so the voices who are on the opposite side of what Ann and I seem to be on, are going to say, there's not going to be it's going to be hard to get receipts, is what I'm saying. It's going to take 3 or 4 years down the road. And in the meantime, there will be other considerations. I'm concerned, and it's a shame that we would have to be concerned about this, but whenever there are bans, there are cheaters. And when there are cheaters, they will be confronted, and there may be violent situations in classrooms that occur because of that. I believe that at the beginning of these bans, we may be in for a larger amount of that. And that's scary.
All right, Kathy, we got 30 seconds left, but we are Real Clear Politics. So I met Sarah Huckabee when she was Sarah Huckabee, and then she was the daughter of governor I'd covered, Mike Huckabee. And then she was White House press secretary. She got married, she had kids, she moved back to Arkansas. She's now governor. How's she doing as governor?
She has a really good approval rating, and I think she's won over a lot of skeptics because of some of the early stands she's taken, especially in education, but also in prison reform. There's several different areas, and I think it's playing well right now. And I'm glad. I was a little bit afraid that she was going to be tapped to go do something else nationally, and I'm glad she's still our governor.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for us today. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief of Real Clear Politics. Been talking with Kathy Warren and Ann Welty about school reform in Arkansas and Texas politics. Join us again tomorrow, same time, 3 p.m. in California, where I grew up, 6 p.m. in the East, and 5 p.m. in the Central, in the Heartland, where our two guests are from. Have a good evening.